Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Sudokult podcast. I am David Rangsk Clamage, and with me is Philip Newman. Yeah, okay. I introduced you at the same time you introduced yourself. All right, so we'll save you from the long introductions again, and we're just going to get right into it. So we have a lot to cover this episode, and the first thing we want to cover is the 2 puzzles that we covered, or that we provided in last episode as practice for what we learned there. And so Philip here is going to go over what we were meant to see in those puzzles, in case you did not see it, or you want to know more about them. So go ahead, Philip.
Okay, just as a reminder for last week, we talked about alternating inference chains. And those chains are made up of strong links and weak links. Yep. Strong link is 2 candidates, one of which must be true. They could be both true, but at least one is true. A weak link is 2 candidates that can't both be true. So in this puzzle, there are a lot of strong links on 5. You can see there are 4 or 5s in the grid. To start with, you can actually place one in the center cell. But in row 1, there are only 2 places that 5 can go. The other 3 cells see 5s in column 2, 8, and box 2. There are also only 2 places in column 1, and in row 9, and in column 9, just to name a few. So the first technique we talked about last week, that's an alternating inference chain, was the skyscraper. So skyscraper is 2 strong links that are both in columns or both in rows, connected by a weak link in the other. So the one I'm going to show here, we have a strong link in row 1.
Yep.
We have a weak link in column 1. These 2 cells see each other, so they can't both be 5.
Yeah, and it's also a strong link, but in this case we're using it as a weak link.
Yeah, links can be both.
Yeah.
And then there is a strong link in row 9. So our conclusion from the alternating inference chain is that one of the ends must contain the 5. And the reason that's true, either this is a 5, or if this isn't a 5, then this one has to be. This one can't be because of the weak link, and so this one has to be.
Yep.
So our conclusion is one of these 2 cells contains a 5. That means these 2 cells see this cell in column 7 and this cell in box 3. These 2 cells see this cell in column 9 and this cell in box 9. So we can eliminate 5 from all of those cells. In particular, we eliminated one of our green cells from column 9, so we can immediately place a 5 here.
Yep. And
we can immediately place a 5 there as well. And from there, it's just singles. So just to undo for a second, I just want to show a different technique that is also an alternating inference chain, which is a 2-string kite. A 2-string kite, rather than both of the strong links being in the same type of house, so both columns or both rows like the skyscraper. A 2-string kite, you have a strong link in a row, and then you have a weak link in a box. These 2 cells see each other in box 9. And then you have a strong link in the column. So this would be a 2-string kite. We can conclude that these 2 cells, one of them has to contain a 5. In fact, both of them contain a 5. But at least one contains a 5, so we can eliminate 5 from the cell that sees both of those.
Yep.
And that lets us immediately place 5 in those same 2 cells.
So this is definitely an example of 2 patterns that have different names and are often considered different things to human solvers. But from an AIC perspective, they're exactly the same. It's still strong, weak, strong. It still forms a strong link between the 2 ends, and it still does the same kinds of eliminations. And
you will see this very often with the turbot fish. If you have skyscrapers, there's a pretty good chance you're going to have 2-string kites as well. You might have empty rectangles. You might have finned XWings, which we're going to talk about in this episode, and so on. There's a lot of overlap there. All right, so that's 3-link clover. The other puzzle was Awkward Lazy Snowflake. So this one was demonstrating the ALS-XZ technique. And the focus here is on these 8 cells. I'm just going to highlight those. If we look at what candidates can be in these cells, so this can contain a 1, 2, 3, or 6. This can contain a 1, 2, or 3. This can contain a 1, 2, or 3. And this can contain 1, 2, 3, or 9, I believe.
So we can already see this ALS that you set up in our last podcast.
Yeah, so this is a little bit bigger example. Last time we had 3 cells with 4 candidates. Yep. This has 4 cells with 5 candidates. So just an extended version. Down here, we can have 2, 3, 4, and 6. Here we can have 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, and 2, 3, 4, 9. So again, we have an ALS. This looks very similar to the one up here, and that is by design.
Yep.
So what conclusions can we make? We have an ALS here in row 3, and in this ALS, if 6 is in it, it has to appear in this one cell. Let's make it purple. And if 9 is in it, it has to appear in this cell. Let's make it, I don't know, red. So what the ALS tells us is either there's a 6 here in the cell, or if there's not a 6 here, we have a 1, 2, 3 triple. And so this is no longer an almost locked set. This is now a locked set. We now have 4 candidates in 4 cells. And in fact, 3 of them are in these 3 cells, and we have to have a 9 in the last cell. Exactly the same is true in this one. There's one place that can hold 6. There's one place that can hold 9. And so either there is a 6 here, or there is a 9 here, or both.
Yep.
In both cases. So what we have is a strong link in row 3 between the 6 in column 2 and the 9 in column 8.
Yep.
Then we have a weak link between the 9s. They see each other. Then we have a strong link between this 9 and this 6 in row 7. And then we have a weak link back to the starting cell. So we have a ring. We have a continuous nice loop with ALSs. And so you call this an ALS-XZ. The XZ are for the 2 candidates that you're forming weak links on. Since both candidates are weakly linked, you call it a doubly linked ALS-XZ.
Okay.
But I just call it an ALS-XZ ring because that's easier. So what that does, let's imagine we put 6 in this cell. Well, now we can't have 6 down here in row 7 anymore. And we already established that gives us a locked set in this row. So there's a 9 here. Otherwise, if there's not a 6 there, well, now we have a 9 here. We can't have a 9 here, and we have a 6 here.
Yep.
That pattern should look very familiar. This is basically an X-wing, just on 2 different digits. So we can conclude that either there is a 6, that there is a 6 in one of the purple cells, and there is a 9 in one of the red cells. We don't know which, but we know that's true. Yeah, so we can eliminate 6. We can eliminate 6 from here, and we can eliminate 9 from here. And go on with the puzzle. There are some additional eliminations we can make. Since we have 6, 9 in opposite corners, that means the other cells have to contain 1, 2, 3 in this case, and 2, 3, 4 in this case. We can't have a 6 and a 9 in the same row. So we can eliminate 2, 3, 4 from these cells, and we can eliminate 1, 2, 3 from these cells.
Yeah, if you want to know more about how that works, we went over it in detail in our last podcast. So this is where you would spot that in this puzzle. And from there, it should solve, right?
It should collapse from here, yep. Okay, that's it for last week's puzzles. So this week, we're going to start by going back to the first example from last week. We introduced the skyscraper technique with this example, where we had a 6 here. But we started last week with the 6 here, and we talked about the X-Wing. X-Wings are sort of related to skyscrapers. Skyscrapers, you can kind of think of as X-Wings where the ends are offset. So I just wanted to talk about how an X-Wing is defined in a way that is going to generalize for the rest of the things that we're going to talk about. So I think everybody watching this probably knows what an X-Wing is, but we'll go through it really briefly. An X-Wing is where, in this case, the digit 1. In column 1, it can only go in these 2 green cells, in row 1 and row 9. And in column 9, exactly the same thing is true. So I could have a 1 here. And if I have a 1 here, I can't have a 1 here. So I have a 1 down here in row 9, column 9. The only other possibility is that I have a 1 in the bottom left corner, and then I can't have it in the bottom right, so it's in the top right. And that's where it gets its name. It kind of forms an X, the 2 possibilities. So a couple of terms I want to introduce are base sets and cover sets. So when I say base set, what I'm talking about is the columns that are limited. So these are the 2 base sets of the X-Wing.
So in when we're looking at this grid, when you say base set, you can be thinking those are the column 1 and column 9 are the 2 base sets of the X-Wing.
Those are the 2 columns, in this case, where 1 is restricted to 2 places. Okay. The other term is cover set. So base sets are where the cell is restricted. Cover sets are where the cell can appear in the base sets. So the goal of a fish is to find cover sets that cover, that's why they're called cover sets, all of the cells that are in the base set that can hold that candidate. So in this case, row 1 and row 9 cover the 4 cells that are highlighted in green, where the 1 can appear in the base sets.
And you need the same number of cover sets as base sets, right? They have to be exactly the same number.
Yes. To have a basic fish, you have to have the same number.
So we can't cover this with box 1, 3, 7, and 9, right? Because that's too many cover sets.
Right. And yeah, I can go through what happens if we do that briefly. But if you think back to last week, we talked about locked sets and almost locked sets.
Yeah.
Locked set was the case where we had 1 too many candidates for the cells. You could have a similar thing with fish. You can have an almost fish.
Okay.
Where you have 2 base sets and 3 cover sets.
Gotcha.
So it's not quite a fish. Maybe you'll be able to do something with it fancy, but... Alright, so the conclusion here is 1 cannot appear in any of these cells.
Right, and if you're familiar with the X-Wing, then you would understand that pretty naturally.
Yep. Yeah, and the reason for that is if I put a 1, say, in this cell, it eliminates 1 from both of the cells in row 1 that were in the base set. So that means we need a 1 down here, and we need a 1 down here. And that doesn't work, obviously.
Yep.
What we've done is taken away 1 of the cover sets. So now we have 2 base sets and only 1 cover set. And that's never going to work. So any cell, any candidate that would cause that to happen can't be true. So the effect in a basic X-wing is to eliminate all of the cells that are cover set cells, but not base.
Okay.
So all the non-base cover cells. All right. So that is a X-wing. This generalizes to bigger fish. And David has done a whole video. You've done 2 videos, actually. You did an X-wing video and a swordfish jellyfish video.
Yeah, and I'll put up in the little card if you want more information where I spend about an hour on both the X-wing and the swordfish and jellyfish if you want that really in depth. But we're kind of coming in assuming you kind of already know a bit about those. Yeah, so
the main thing I want to emphasize is the basin cover terminology, because we're going to come back to that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important because I'm not that familiar with it either.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so this is just a bigger example. So X-wing, we had 2 rows, 2 columns, or 2 columns, 2 rows, whichever way it was. Here we have a swordfish, and I'm just going to show it rather than talk through how you could find it. These are the cells in columns 2, 5, and 8 where 9 can appear.
Right.
The 9s in row 3 and row 7 eliminate the other cells. So this is a swordfish. So our base sets are the columns, just like in the previous example. Yep. The cover sets are the rows. Well, I'll highlight the whole row. So those 3 rows cover all of the possible locations for 9 in the 3 base columns. So just like before, we can eliminate from all of the non-base cover cells.
And I think it's a good time to talk about a natural way of thinking about that, which almost feels like a set argument, but not quite, which is, well, maybe it does, but we know that the columns have 3 9s. There must be exactly 3 9s in those 3 columns. And then those 3s are going to appear in the green cells somewhere. We don't know where, but they're going to be in the green cells somewhere because the rest of the columns can't have 9s. And so now if we can have if we cover those same green cells with a different set, but in this case rows, we have covered them in 3 rows. Those 3 rows also need 3 9s, and they can only get those 3 9s from the green cells because we've proven that those green cells already contain 3 9s. And so anywhere else in those 3 cover sets that previously we thought could have a 9 now can't, and we can eliminate 9s from them because we've just shown that the green cells are providing all the 9s that those rows can handle.
Yep. So if you're not familiar with set, we are going to cover it in a future episode, probably very soon.
I know everyone's looking forward to the set episode, but it's not this episode.
Yeah, but just as a preview of that, this is what the set argument would look like visually. You can even ignore the green cells for set purposes. So the gray cells that I'm highlighting here, and the red cells in the rows by set contain exactly the same digits. And we already know that there can't be a 9 in any of the gray cells. So there also can't be a 9 in any of the red cells. That's the set version of the argument.
Yeah, and what I like about set is it often actually almost trivializes the understanding of these techniques. Right. In such a general way that it's so powerful. But
yeah, it's just a slightly different way of looking at things, and we've talked about this on Discord a little bit. I'll mention it here. Fish are basically just the same as subsets or tuples. It's just they're not on the numbers as candidates.
Yeah, are you guys ready to have your mind blown here? Because this blew my mind when I first heard it. It takes a bit to understand, but
so if you have a naked triple, what that means is you have 3 cells, and each of those 3 cells can only contain 1, 2, 3, say. Those are the only digits they can contain. So what we can show, if those are all in the same row, let me just bring up our sandbox here. So if I had 1, 2, 3 in these cells, what that means is I can't have 1, 2, 3 in any of these cells. Yeah. That's what a naked triple is.
Right.
A swordfish is basically that. It's just not on the digits, it's on the rows. So what we're looking at is all the places in column 2, 5, and 8 where 9 can appear in terms of the rows. And so in column 2, it can appear in 2, 5, and 8. And in column 5, it can appear in 2, 5, and 8. And in column 8, it can appear in 2, 5, and 8. This is exactly the same as this. Just swapping the meaning of digit and row.
Yeah, so you can almost imagine creating a inverse Sudoku board where wherever it's really hard to conceptualize, but you could sort of replace rows with numbers. Where
yeah, and there actually are preserved, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah, there actually are some programs that will do that for you. Unless you're very familiar with them, it's really confusing to look at. I can't wrap my head around it most of the time. But if you got good at that sort of thing, it would give you a way to just immediately spot things. We were talking about the difference between by value and by local links last time, and how it's much easier for us to spot and keep track of by value strong links because we can write those 2 digits in the cell and immediately know this cell can only contain these 2 digits. One of them must be true. If you change your viewpoint to, say, a row number grid where you're marking the columns, those by local links suddenly become by value. So you can immediately see them. Locals. Right. So you can immediately see them in that grid that you have a by local link in this column or row or box or whatever. So while I have this up, the other thing I wanted to talk about is whenever you have a basic fish, you are also going to have a counterpart to that fish. And in this case...
And this is, since we're talking about, say, this being like a triple, the counterpart is like having, the fish would be that we're showing would be the naked triple, but then there's an equivalent, hidden tuple to go along with that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, really, we didn't need these highlighted because they already couldn't be 9, but they're highlighted now. That's okay. So if we look at the rows instead, row 1, 9 can't appear in these 2 cells. It can only appear in the blue cells. So in column 3, 4, 6, and 7. In row 4, exactly the same. In row 6, exactly the same. In row 9, exactly the same. So we have 4 rows where 9 can only appear in 4 particular columns. So our base sets in this case are the rows, and our cover sets are the columns. So column 3, column 4, column 6, and column 7. Those 4 columns contain all of our blue cells, all of the cells that can contain 9 in those rows. So we have a jellyfish this time. So size 4 fish is a jellyfish. And it gives exactly the same eliminations as the swordfish if you ignore these that already couldn't be 9.
And I think I explained this also in my video on the swordfish and jellyfish, which is essentially you never have to look, at least in a classic Sudoku, you never have to look for a basic fish that's larger than a jellyfish. You don't have to look for a 5 fish or a 6 fish because there's always going to be equivalent on, if you say you were looking on rows and you find a 6 fish, that means on columns you're going to find a swordfish, or smaller.
Or smaller, yeah.
Right. Depending on how many givens there are already. And so, like, yeah, you could find an 8 fish, whatever that means, but you're probably better off just noticing the hidden single. And it's the same with tuples, where you have a naked single, then naked pair, naked triple, naked quadruple, and then instead of finding naked quintuples, you could find them, and they're perfectly valid. But instead, we like to think of it as a hidden quadruple, then hidden triple, then hidden pair, and then hidden single.
Right.
And they're just, two different ways of looking at the same pattern.
Yeah. Now, in the tuple case, when you're solving manually, a lot of times it's easier to see the naked tuples,
right,
as they get bigger. At least for me, you might find a naked quintuple, and then you could turn around and say, okay, if there's a naked quintuple, there's also a hidden quadruple or a hidden triple or whatever. That's not really the case for fish. It's basically never easier to find a size 6 fish versus the corresponding swordfish.
Yeah, and it's because you're looking for these in essentially the same way. Because instead of inverting, it doesn't feel the same as inverting hidden versus naked tuples.
Exactly.
Because of just the way you're visualizing it.
Right. Yeah, when I'm looking for fish, I'm generally highlighting all the cells that it can appear in and looking for patterns where it's limited. And I'm going to see the 2 fish, the X-wing, much faster than I'm going to see the 5 fish.
Yep.
However, that is only true for basic fish. And so that's kind of why I wanted to bring it up is, well, it is true that you never need to look for more than jellyfish if you're looking for basic fish in a classic, in a 9x9 classic. But as you get complex fish, sometimes the simplest fish is going to be bigger than that. I'm not going to show any examples of those because they're really hard to construct. Sometimes they just appear.
Yeah.
But it can happen. If you ever hear the term squirm bag,
it's a great name.
sometimes starfish.
Okay.
That's referring to a 5 fish. Whale is referring to a 6 fish. Apparently Hodoku has an example of a finned mutant whale or something like that. That is the simplest fish that's available. There's probably something simpler than a complex fish of that size. Usually there's some chain or something. But if you see those terms, that's what they mean. You can also just refer to them by their size. So a size 5 fish is perfectly valid and everybody will understand what you mean.
In fact, I think if you say 5 fish, more people will understand what you mean than if you say squirm bag. But
squirm bag is so fun to say. All right. So that's our basic fish. Let me just check my notes real quick. So let's go back to our example on the X-wing. Well, I'll leave the highlighting. So previously with the X-wing, we eliminated from all of these cells. What happens if we remove our 6 here?
Well, we don't have an X-wing anymore, right?
We don't have an X-wing anymore. Because now our digit 1 can appear in 3 cells in column 9. So what do? Do we just give up?
Yeah, let's just give up. Find something else, right? Yeah. I'm sure that's what you're getting at.
Quit Sudoku. Okay. So in this case, we would call this a finned X-wing.
Which makes more sense for fish than for X-wings, but I guess X-wings can have fins.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to try and convince our son when he finally earns a fish to name it X-wing.
He'll probably name it after a Disney character or something.
Probably.
It's always Nemo.
He will probably name it Nemo or Lightning McQueen.
Yeah.
Those are probably the 2 options.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what if olefin is it's a cell that is in a base set. So in this case, the cell is in column 9. That was one of our base sets. But it's not in a cover set.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem if you have a lot of them. You don't really have anything if you have fins everywhere on your grid. You're picking arbitrary sets. But if you only have one fin, sometimes 2 or 3, you can still make eliminations. And the way you do that is thinking about what happens with this cell. There are 2 options. This fin could be 1. That's valid.
Yep.
But if it's not 1, I'll just put our 6 back, then we have an X-Wing again, right?
Yep.
We have a regular, boring, basic X-Wing. So one of those 2 things is true. Either we have an X-Wing and 1 can't appear in any of the red cells, or we have a 1 here and 1 can't appear in any of these cells.
Yep. And so now we can take the overlap.
Now we can take the overlap. So these 2 cells still can't contain 1, regardless of which of those is true.
So we get far fewer eliminations, but it might be just enough to get progress on our puzzle. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what a fin is in a fish.
And so basically, if you're trying to cover your base houses, and you're almost able to do it, but there's just one that you can't cover, then you might still be able to make a finned elimination.
Right. And that's kind of what we were talking about with an almost fish.
Yeah.
You could try to have 3 cover sets. That's not going to work very well, though, because now you have a bunch of fins. Effectively. But when you just have 1 fin, then it works out. So when you have fins, your eliminations are any cells that are non-base cover cells, just like with a basic fish, that also see all of the fins.
Gotcha.
Not just 1 fin, all of the fins.
All of the fins, yes.
No matter how many you have. Okay?
All right.
So you might ask, we have a finned X-Wing here. What happens if we have a 6 here?
Was this not a skyscraper?
This was a skyscraper. That's exactly what it was. So obviously this is related somehow to our finned fish.
Yes.
And we already mentioned that skyscrapers and 2-string kites, they're called turbot fish. They're called that for a reason. They're related to fish. So,
and I looked it up. Turbot is a kind of fish, and there's some hilarious YouTube videos where people just keep saying turbot over and over again. It sounds weirder every time they say it. So.
I haven't gotten used to saying it.
It's like how to cook a turbot fish, and they just.
I want to pronounce it turbo, but
I really do too. I want it to be turbo fish because that's
apparently not.
Apparently, it's turbot.
Yeah. Well, if we discover a new fish-like technique, we'll call it turbo.
Turbo, just to confuse everything.
All right. So in this case, we do still have a finned X-Wing. So we can still think of this as there are 2 cells in column 1 that can contain 1, yep. And there are 2 cells in column 9 that can contain 1. This one can't anymore. So it's got a 6 in it. And they are covered almost by these 2 rows.
Right.
With just this fin left over. So we can make exactly the same eliminations.
But there's also another way to cover it now that I'm seeing.
Yes. So that's the thing with the skyscraper. So we can make these eliminations from that version of the finned X-Wing. We could also use these 2 as the cover. So now this is not the fin, this is the fin.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is the fin and this is the cover, then we can eliminate from these.
And if you think about the skyscraper, that's the exact same eliminations the skyscraper was making.
So the skyscraper was telling us that 1 has to appear in one of these 2 cells. And it eliminates from the same red cells. Okay. So what do we call a skyscraper in terms of fish? These are a bunch of terms that you don't really need to know. We're bringing them up more so that if you see them, you aren't just completely confused and scared off. So this still works like a finned X-Wing. And if all you see is this is a finned X-Wing and you only get these eliminations, that's great. You found something.
Yep.
You eliminated one from these cells. That might be enough to solve the puzzle. It might make you see that, oh, it can't be in these two cells either. But if you see the whole pattern as two finned X-Wings, because they are on exactly the same cells, you call that a Siamese fish.
So when you say exactly the same cells, what does that exactly mean?
So the cells that can contain one in our base set. So these
I see.
These
okay.
These were the only cells that can contain one.
Our base set cells are the same, but there's two different finned X-Wings to make out of them.
Exactly. And there's two different choices of fin, but yeah. All the same cells are involved.
In Siamese, because it's basically two conjoined X-Wings.
It's two
conjoined finned X-Wings.
Yes.
Okay.
Two conjoined finned X-Wings. There's another word that goes in here as well, which is ordinarily, so if this 6 wasn't here, we'll have to go back to our previous coloring. Oh, that's okay. Ordinarily, our options are this could be a 1, in which case we have an X-Wing, right? Or this is not a 1.
Other way around. But
other way around. This could be a 1, or it's not a 1, in which case we have an X-Wing. Okay?
Yep.
If there's a 6 here, this could still be a 1. That's one option. But if this is not a 1, we don't have an X-Wing anymore. I mean, we kind of do, but it's a degenerate X-Wing.
Yeah, it's a hidden single
it's
1.
It's actually just a single.
Yeah.
So we just put a 1 here, and we just put a 1 here, and we're done. We don't have to worry about the X-Wing. So what that's called is a sashimi fish. If you have fins in your fish, and the fin not being true doesn't leave you with that same fish. If it reduces to a smaller fish or singles or whatever, that's called a sashimi fish.
Okay, good to know.
Do you need to know that? Not really. But yeah, you can call, and this is mostly thanks to Sam Kappelman-Lyons, who brought this up recently on Discord. You can call a skyscraper a Siamese sashimi finned X-Wing. If you want to.
If you want to. You can also call it an ALS, if you not ALS, an AIC chain if you want. So
exactly.
The name is less important than the logic, and there's also multiple ways to approach the logic. So hopefully one of these will stick with you, and you'll be able to use that in your solves. That's the important part.
Exactly. That is the important part.
But when communicating with others about what you did to solve, sometimes it's useful to know, especially if they're using those terms, what they mean.
Right.
So,
yeah, if I'm insisting that there's a skyscraper in this puzzle, and David is over here talking about finned X-Wings, and we don't know what those terms mean, there's going to be some confusion.
Exactly.
But if we know what the terms mean, we're going to recognize, hey, we're probably talking about the same thing, or at least something very similar. All right. So let's move on to contrived example number 4. A different type of fish. So we talked about basic fish. We talked about fins, which are base cells that are not covered.
They're almost fish.
They're almost fish. But so far, we've only looked at fish where the base sets are all in the rows or all in the columns, and the cover sets are in the other.
Yep.
What about boxes? We've got boxes too. Those are sets.
We do have boxes.
They contain the digits 1 to 9, just like the rows and columns. So you can use those in your fish as well. So this is an example of what that might look like. So in row 3, 4, and 5, these are the cells that can contain 9. How can I cover those cells?
Well, the base. So you use the rows as the
I use the rows as the base.
So I can't use those rows.
Right.
So
that would be cheating.
Yeah. Looking at it, it seems like the only way to do it is to use column 3, column 7, and box 5.
That's right. So we can cover all of the green cells by picking these 3 houses. And we make this cool H.
Okay. Better than uncool H, I guess.
So when we're using boxes like this, whether they're in the cover or in the base, we call this a Frankenfish.
Frankenfish. So Frankenfish is when you aren't using rows and columns? Is that what you mean? Or?
You're still using rows and columns.
Okay.
But you're also using boxes.
Okay.
In one or the other or both.
I might have to ask you later that I've heard mutant as well, so I'm not sure if that...
We will get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll show you what that means too.
Okay.
Yeah, so in this case, we still have a focus on rows for the bases and a focus on columns for the covers. We just also have a box as one of the cover sets.
Yeah.
We could have a box as one of the base sets, but this example, it's in the cover set.
And so because this works exactly as any other fish, we're just using a box instead of a third column, my assumption here is the eliminations are every cell you have highlighted that's not green.
Exactly. So every not those. Every cover cell that is not a base cell cannot contain a 9. Because if any of these cells contain a 9, let's say this one, then that rules out this cover set. And we don't have any way of meeting the 3 base sets with 3 cover sets.
Yeah, so we proved using the rows that we must have 3 9s in the greens. How are we supposed to get 3 9s in the greens if there's a 9 in that red cell there? It's just, there aren't enough green cells to support 3 9s.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens in this case is we can't have 9 here. We put a 9 here. We can't have 9 here or here.
Put one more 9, yeah. Where's the third one?
9 to cover one of the rows, but not both because they're in the same box.
Yeah, and this argument is exactly the same as a swordfish. It's just, it doesn't feel the same as a swordfish.
It doesn't look the same as a swordfish.
But the logic is identical.
It's exactly the same logic, yeah. You're just mixing boxes in. And just like with any other fish, you can have fins.
There's our fin.
There's our 6 that we're going to remove. That's going to be my my trademark now.
Yeah, fins can only be 6s, right? Is that
yeah. All right, so this is now a fin. So this is in base set row 5. It's not covered. So we have a fin. So either this is a 9, or it's not a 9, and we have our Frankenfish.
And so the elimination is what's seen by, well, basically the red cells that are also seen by the blue cells. So it's just that one that you have highlighted.
Exactly. So it's just this one.
Now, one thing I just noticed is this could be seen a little bit differently, where I think you could make, let me think, could you use column 3, box 5, and box 6 and have your fin be row 3, column 7?
Let's try it out. I haven't actually looked at other possibilities for this one.
So. Oh no! So keep those greens highlighted, right?
Keep the green.
So our base rows are still rows 3, 4, and 5.
Okay.
But I'm going to cover using column 3, box 5, and box 6.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, so even without this, yeah. Okay, so yeah, cover here, and here, and here. And now this is our fin.
Exactly.
So either the fin is true, or we have eliminations like this in our new Franken swordfish. And this cell again sees the fin and is a non-base cover.
And it's the exact same elimination. So
yep. So that would work as well. Yep. And there's probably some larger fish as well that will hit the same thing.
I just wanted to point that out because, there's more than one way to look at these, and I think that's kind of fun.
Yeah, there almost always is. And yeah, it can be really interesting to see all the different ways. All right. So that's a Frankenfish. It's not really any more complicated, but they are harder to see in a puzzle unless they're very well telegraphed. And
yeah, if I highlighted all the 9s and I saw that pattern, I'm not convinced I would see the Frankenfish. I would be convinced that there's nothing to do with 9s. So,
well, now everybody knows that in one of the example puzzles there might be a Frankenfish.
There might be a Frankenfish in one of our example
and hopefully puzzles. It's fairly well telegraphed because it's going to look similar to this. Yeah, so that's Frankenfish. So you asked, what about a mutant fish?
Yes, I did.
That doesn't look like a mutant fish. That looks like a Fistomophel ring.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the Fistomophel ring, this might be ringing some alarms.
Right. So what a mutant fish is when the base sets mix the rows and columns.
Okay.
So Frankenfish is adding in boxes, but there's still this separation of rows in one and columns in the other. If you're mixing the rows and columns, and this can be true in the cover sets as well, but definitely in the base. So these are going to be our base cells this time.
Yeah.
These are all the places in row 3, row 7, column 3, and column 7 that can contain a 9. Those cells.
Okay.
And we can cover these. How can
if you're familiar with how Fistomophel works, it's probably pretty clear how to cover them.
Yeah.
Using boxes 1, 3, 7, and 9.
Right. So box 1 covers these 4 green cells, and the same for the other boxes. So what do we eliminate? We eliminate the cells that are covered but not part of the base.
Yeah, and so those cannot contain a 9.
Yep. If you're familiar with Fistomophel, you know that anyway, because you know the red cells contain exactly these digits. And none of those digits are 9.
Yep.
Okay, so that's called a mutant fish. In this case, a mutant jellyfish, because we have 4 base sets and 4 cover sets.
Okay.
The cover sets can mix rows and columns and boxes however they like. The base sets in this case are mixing rows and columns. They could mix boxes as well, too. Usually if you're mixing all 3, you've got some really giant squirm bag type thing.
Okay, yeah.
So it's pretty rare that you have rows, columns, and boxes and only have one of each. It can happen, though. Hey, there's a 6 I can delete.
Wonder what that blue 6 was doing there.
All right, so I highlighted this in blue. So this is obviously going to be a fin.
Yep.
I could have put it in green, though, right? Because this isn't a base set.
True.
So this is a place in row 7 that can contain a 9. It's also a place in column 7 that can contain a 9. So this is just part of my base set, and I can still cover all these cells by picking box 9. So do I have the same eliminations?
Well, if I was thinking of it as a fin, it's either going to be 9 or not 9. If it's 9, it'll eliminate the red cells in box 9. If it's not 9, it still eliminates the red cells in box 9. So I would think we get just box 9 eliminated.
Yeah, and that's correct. You might look at it at first glance, though, not thinking about it as a fin, and say, well, I'm still covering all of my base cells with my 4 cover sets. I should be able to eliminate all the red cells. Right.
When you put it that way, I can't disagree immediately.
Okay. So the difference here is that this cell is part of 2 base sets.
I see.
So what happens if it's a 9?
If it's a 9, then 2 base sets contain a 9.
We're only left with 2 base sets. and we've only used one cover set. So now we have 2 base sets and 3 cover sets. So we can't eliminate anything here. We have an extra cover set, right? So previously with our fins, we had a base cell that wasn't covered at all, right?
Yeah.
So if there was a 9 in that base cell, we've eliminated... I'll just go back to one of our examples. Oh, that'll work. So if we had a 9 here, that eliminated effectively this base set.
Okay.
So now we only have 2 base sets. We only have 2 base sets that were covered by
3
cover sets. There's no way to cover these cells with just 2 cover sets.
Because those 2 rows are the base set, so you can't use those.
Yeah. Even using boxes, there's no way to do it.
Yeah.
So having a 9 here makes it so it's not a fish anymore.
Right.
Basically. Or what's left is not a fish anymore. The same thing is happening here. Right?
Yeah, so if we think about our green cells are no longer highlighted properly, right? Because we just have...
Yeah, we can remove these. Yeah, so we've used up effectively 2 base sets by putting the 9 here. We've used one of our cover sets as well, but since we've satisfied more of our base sets than we've used cover sets, we have an extra cover set. And so that makes the rest of the fish not work. What we're left with is these cells.
So when we're forming these mutant fish, basically we can't let open cells be overlaps, or those will become fins, basically.
Those become fins, yeah.
Yeah.
We can let it happen, but they become fins.
Yeah, so it restricts what the fish can do.
Yeah. And like David was saying, it works exactly the same way as our other types of fins. Either this is a 9, and these can't be 9, or it's not a 9, and these still can't be 9 because of our fish. So logically, it works the same way. You might see these referred to as endofins, as opposed to the others as exofins. Usually you will just see fin for the other type, because these are really rare.
Yeah.
These only appear in Mutant and sometimes Frankenfish. And you usually need a lot of base sets to have them at all.
Gotcha.
But I wanted to point it out because it's not obvious immediately why this would change the fish. But it changes it in the same way as the exofin. It's a cell that is part of more base sets than it is cover sets.
Gotcha.
Okay. So that's an endofin.
Yep.
We talked about exofins. We talked about mutants. We talked about Frankenfish. We talked about... I think that's everything.
There'll be a vocabulary quiz in the... No, I'm kidding.
Siamese and, yeah.
Sashimi, yeah.
We talked about almost everything.
Almost everything. There's more. But wait, there's more.
There's one more question that came up to pose, which is, we talked about fins, which are, we have 1 base set and no cover set, or we have 2 base sets and 1 cover set. And that restricts the eliminations that we can make. What if we have more cover sets than we have base sets?
Well, I would think that would kind of ruin our fish, wouldn't it?
Basically, yeah. All right, so in this case, where can 9 go? This is kind of the reverse of this example.
The
so where can
system.
9 go in the boxes? 9 can go in these cells and these cells. Let's see. How can we cover these?
The 4 boxes, I would assume.
Well, so
we use the boxes.
The
okay.
base is the boxes, yeah.
Okay, so that's cheating.
Let me put my 6 here, actually.
Okay.
For now. We'll come back to that.
Okay, so I can cover them using column 3 and 7 and row 3 and 7.
Right. So we can cover like this. We can cover like this.
Which might look familiar to people.
So this is, again, basically the Fistamifel ring in reverse. So the difference here is, here we had 2 base sets overlapping on the same cell, and we got a fin. Here we have 2 cover sets overlapping on the same cell, each of these cells.
Right.
So our normal eliminations are the cells that are in a cover set and are not part of a base set. So that would be these. And we can eliminate 9 from those. But these cells are part of 2 cover sets and only part of 1 base set. So we can also eliminate those.
Because if we were to fill a 9 in, say, that cell, it's now... How do I want to think about that? It's only fulfilling 1 of the base sets. So
right.
We need 4 9s in our base sets. But it's fulfilling 2 of the cover sets.
Right.
And so now the cover sets aren't able to
So we can't use these anymore at all.
Yeah.
So this would tell us we need a 9 here, and we need a 9 here. And now where do we put 9 in this box?
Yep.
We don't. Yep. So this is a special type of elimination. And again, the logic works very similarly to all of our other eliminations. We're looking at cells that are part of more cover sets than base sets.
Gotcha. So
our normal case is no base set, 1 cover set. That's these cells. Yeah. But if it's part of 2 cover sets and only 1 base set, and you're never going to have a case where it's part of 2 cover sets and 2 base sets because you don't have that many sets to use in a classic.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking about variants and what you might do
right.
with that.
Maybe if you have extra regions and diagonals and so on. But in a classic, you have a row, a column, and a box. Those are the only 3 houses that a cell can be part of.
A given cell can only be in 3 sets. Yep. So.
Right. So if you want the term for this, this is called cannibalization.
I like that term, cannibalization. So it's like the cover sets are eating themselves or something. The fish is eating itself.
These are part of the base sets, so that you can think of them as part of the fish, but they're getting eliminated. So the fish is eating itself.
Very nice.
And again, you'll notice I highlighted exactly the Fistamifel ring.
Yep.
This is exactly the reverse of this case.
And the logic's exactly the same, where there's no 9s in the corners.
Logic is exactly the same. There's no 9s in the corners, so there can't be any 9s in the ring. Oop, wrong button. There can't be any 9s in the ring.
Yep.
Again, we can have a fin. Completely unsurprising. If we have a fin here, that means we can only eliminate from this cell.
Yep. Because
this is the only cell that sees the fin and is also either a non-base cover set or part of 2 cover sets.
Yeah.
And this, in this case, is part of 2 cover sets. So this would be a cannibalized, finned mutant.
Cannibalized
mutant. It is mutant
jellyfish.
Mutant jellyfish, yeah.
Yeah.
It is a mutant because we're mixing rows and columns in the cover sets.
But in this case, the mixing's in the cover and not in the base.
It is in the cover, yeah.
Okay. But it's still mutant regardless.
I believe so. For a long time, I was mixing up franken and mutant and just calling everything mutant. So.
Gotcha. I'm pretty sure I will as well. Or I just won't use the terms at all, which you don't have to. Yeah. But if you want to understand what these people on the forums are talking about, sometimes it's good to have context. So.
And you will see the term mutant in other contexts. I have even used it for set, where set is using boxes in addition to the rows and columns. probably for that, franken would just as valid, but that's what those terms mean when it comes to fish.
Well, okay. So I think that was everything you wanted to cover.
That is everything.
Yeah. So do we have examples that
we have 3 example puzzles today?
Okay.
I will give you the links to include in the YouTube description. One of them is just a basic fish example, just one that wasn't included in David's Learn to Love.
Yeah. In
videos.
case you got through all 20 X-Wings and all 20 of the swordfish and jellyfish that I provided. Right. Here's one more for you.
Yep. So one is just basic fish. One is a frankenfish, and one is finned fish. I don't remember what order they're going to be in. So,
and probably a lot of people aren't remembering exactly what those mean anyway. So just try to use your logic to. You can watch again, and you can also just use the foundational logic of what you learned here, and whether or not you know the name of what you're using. Hopefully, the logic is correct, and you can make the proper eliminations. So
but do watch again, like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, all those things that you're supposed to say on YouTube. Right?
He said it, not me, right? I'll say it again. Please subscribe. I have a goal of 1,000 subscribers. That is a YouTube threshold that's very important, and I would like to reach it at some point. I'd like to thank everyone who has subscribed since the last podcast, and I'd like to thank everyone who subscribes during this podcast and in the future. So if you liked this, again, please do leave a comment. Let us know if you enjoyed the podcast, if you like this kind of content. Is it too fast? Is it too slow? What other kinds of topics would you like covered? Don't worry, we will cover set. that is definitely something we'll cover. But what other topics are you interested in? Have you seen some weird, obscure technique that you'd like more explanation about? Are there less obscure techniques that you still would like to understand? Do you want us to expand on something we've already mentioned? Anything like that would be great. We love to get ideas for what to cover in this podcast. And again, in the description, you will find 3 puzzles to solve with 3 kinds of fishes that we covered here. And thank you for watching. And we will see you. I think we're going to try to do this every other week. So Philip isn't completely swarmed with trying to research this stuff every week. So until next time, thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.